Hello, everybody. My name is Lyle Arnett, and I am a hobbyist photographer, just an amateur, nothing more. I have had opportunities in the past to do it professionally, but I never really liked taking photos for other people. I always wanted to and so that's what I've done. And over the years, I've kind of developed a particular style of shooting panoramic shots. Here you see some images that I've captured on my Flickr page. This one is not a panorama, but obviously this one is, this one is, this one. I've done some astrophotography as well, as you can see here, and lots of things, but a lot of panoramic images. And I've had some questions from people about how to actually create a panorama like this. So I thought I would just take you at least through part of the process after acquisition. Now, just for reference, was using on all of these, the images we're going to look at today, anyways, Sony A Alpha 7 IV. It's a good camera. I've had it for a number of years. I really like the Sony mirrorless setup, but that's kind of discussion for another time. What we're going to be looking at are these images here. Now, these were taken on my honeymoon about a year ago, and we're in London, and this is while we're riding the London Eye, the big Ferris wheel that they have there. And as you can see, all I'm doing, so these first six images, I'm in there with the camera, and I'm just take a photo to the left, pan a little to the right, make sure there's overlap because that's going to be very important for the panorama, and then just keep going as wide as you want the image to be, and then tilt up a little and go back six images, and then tilt up a little more, six more images. So these are the photos we're going to be stitching together. Um, I have already looked at these, and I think they make a pretty good composition. So this is a good one to start with. All of these images, by the way, are going to be in a shared folder. You can find it in the description, the actual raw files. And so you can play around with things and see if my process works for you, or if you can figure out a better way to do it. That's fantastic. That's another thing I should comment on. Everything I'm about to show you are the methods that I use. Undoubtedly, there are steps I'm doing that could be better uh, with a different process, or maybe things I'm doing I don't even need to do. I'm not an expert of any of this software. We're going to be using Camera Raw and Adobe Photoshop. With that said, I do think I get some pretty good results. Maybe it'll help you in the images that you're making. Yeah, so here we go. Let's look at this first image here. What I'm going to do is click on it and open in Camera Raw, right click and open in Camera Raw. And here it is. Now, if we zoom in, we notice immediately that this is a noisy image. Look at all of that digital noise and the water and the automobiles and the leaves of the trees. And it's really noticeable here in the building. And this is because I was having to shoot at 3200 ISO. It was almost dark outside, and I really wanted to get these images, so I cranked up the ISO, and this is what we got. Now, in general, for a panorama, a lot of noise isn't necessarily a bad thing because we're going to be stitching together all 18 of those images, and the apparent noise will actually be reduced significantly because of that. However, there are some things we can do now just to make it a little bit cleaner, and this is why I've opened it in RAW at this stage. So if we come down to detail and open this up, notice it defaults to, at least on my machine, defaults to giving me a 40 sharpening. I don't really care for that, so I'm going to take that off. Here, under the manual noise reduction, are all the traditional settings for how you would remove noise. But at least in this edition of Camera Raw 17.2, it may have been in earlier editions as well. They've added this new feature called denoise, which takes data from the raw image file. This is a Sony RAW file, an ARW file, and it uses AI with that information from the image to do a denoising, and it actually gives really, really good results. So I want to take a look at that now. Yeah, so here it is by default. Notice, and if I click on this image, it shows you the before and the after. You notice there's a lot of the noise is gone, but a lot of the color noise is gone as well. Look at all those sort of magentas and cyans going on, and it just gets rid of all of it. Now, I already played around with some of the settings. 30 seems to be a good spot for this picture. Let me show you some other settings. So here's one on the side of one of the buildings. You're trying to go for minimizing the amount of denoise you actually have to apply. Because if you go too far with it, like let's just crank it all the way up, it starts to give it this plastic look, this sort of fake. It's kind of hard to explain, but everything starts to get blurred together a little bit. And of course, if you go too little, here's 10, there's still, it does a lot, but there's still quite a bit of noise there. So just playing around with this image, and it'll be different for every set of photos that you take. But 30 seems to be what I like. There's still noise, but notice it's just way less and it doesn't have that plastic feel. So I think I'm going to go with 30. So I will click on Enhance, and you see that we have this processing, and you can actually see it here on the little wheel. I'm going to skip ahead and let this get finished, and then we'll take a look at the result. But here's the finished image, and if I punch in here, it's just so much better than it was. So much better. Just look how clean this is over here. Well, too much. I mean, again, still noise, but it's way better than it was. So we're going to go with this. Now I'll just come down here and press done. Notice it created a new file. It didn't override the original. It just applied the effect and created a whole new DNG image file, which is another type of compression-free type of image. So what I'm going to do is go through each one of these images and apply that effect. And that'll take a little time, so I'm going to skip ahead and then I'll see you when it's done. Okay, here we are. I've got all 18 images that I've sent through the denoise process. And now I'm going to go into Photoshop. This is 26.5.0 release, so it's fairly recent. I don't know if it's the latest and greatest, but it's pretty close to being latest and greatest. Then I'm going to go to File, Automate, Photo Merge. And we get all of these options here on the side. So first, let's go find the files themselves. I'm going to click on Browse and just navigate to the folder where I have these images. Select all of them, and there they are. Now, different layouts depend on how you actually capture the images. I was literally standing inside the lift and just panning left to right with my head, basically. What I end up with is kind of a mix of several different types here. So auto always seems to be the best choice for what I do. So I'm going to leave it on auto. Also, the particular lens that I use has a very, very subtle vignette on the images. So I'm going to click on vignette removal. That'll help all of the images blend together better. I'm going to leave everything else unchecked, and I'm just going to click on OK. And here we go. So it's bringing the pictures in. Look how clean that looks. It's bringing the pictures in, and it's going to go through a whole rigmarole here to actually get the photo merge. It takes some time. So again, I'm going to skip ahead. I will say that if your computer isn't the most powerful in the world, this can actually cause at least on Windows, the pop-up that says, not responding. I've had that happen before. I just walk away from the computer, come back in a little bit, and it seems to actually have really been working all the time. Maybe it's just the interface itself that was having trouble. So don't lose hope if for some reason it's not working or seeming to not work the way it's supposed to. Again, I'm going to skip ahead and show you just the final result. Okay, here we go. So this is the merged image. And you can see just by running your mouse over it where each one of the images actually ended up. Something I noticed is over here, it shows you the individual image and where it ended up in the composition. The black and white area is the actual mask that it pulled. Notice there's really nothing on these guys. So if I turn these off and then I click on this one to turn it back on, it's just, look at this. That's all it used, was just that tiny speck. Whereas one of these other images, it used pretty much all of that. It's interesting. So basically, it just means that I took more data through the photographs than I actually needed. It looks like I really just needed the bottom and then the top, and then it would have got, but it's fine. Having more data is better than not having enough. And it's not going to make the file size any bigger because what I'm going to do is select all of these and merge layers. Now, the image immediately looks pretty good. There are some things about it that are worth noting. So, as you saw, a single image took up about the space that I'm tracing out here, and it was with a 50 millimeter lens on a full frame sensor. To go all the way over to here, in order to actually fit all that information onto the flat screen, it's kind of the problem of when you unwrap the globe and you try to put it onto a sheet of paper to make a map. You get all sorts of distortions going on, and you can see it. The bridge is curved in a kind of awkward way. Some of the buildings are leaning backwards, at different angles. So there's distortions going on, but they're not too bad, really. I've seen worse. Some of you may not have any issue with this curvature, um, but I am going to show you one way you could deal with some of these problems. We got the layer selected, and we go to Edit, Transform, Warp, and now I can click and drag from these anchor points. Give it a moment to update here. It allows you to sort of drag and distort the image. So I can bring the bridge down like so and straighten it out somewhat. Um, you can kind of overdo things if you're not careful. So I don't want to stretch things too much. Like you could, that's obviously no good, but that's not too bad. And these buildings, they're leaning to the right a little bit. So I might bring them forward just a hair, straighten them up a little, maybe bring this back some. Okay, that's not too bad. It's just little subtle tweaks like this, and you could play around with this all day. You could break out rulers and grid lines and really get precise. I'm going to call that good and apply the warp effect. Okay, the effect has been applied. Now the next step is to actually crop the image. So I select the crop tool and I'm going to bring it in from the left just till we get past this transparent area. Then from the right, and then we'll bring down from the top and from the bottom. Sometimes it gets a little snappy and it wants to hit particular areas. If you hold down, at least on the Windows machine, Control, it lets you smoothly select. So we're going to go about right there and we'll apply that crop. And there you go. There is our image. If you hold down Z, right click, you can go to fit on screen. If you hold down Z and click on the mouse, you can zoom in and out. It's pretty handy to know. And if you hold down the space bar, you can actually drag around. Now what I want to do is actually go to, make sure the layer is selected, go to Filter, Camera Raw Filter. Okay, so here we go. Camera Raw is open. And if we come down to Detail, the first thing we notice is that the AI noise reduction is not available. So when we actually compose these images into the panorama, the data that was needed from the raw files for the AI to work is no longer available. So you got to do the denoise before you do the photo merge. Otherwise, you're left with the old school tools, which, worked a little bit, but they weren't all that great. They weren't nearly as good as the AI based denoise tool. Okay, so everything I'm going to talk about now is basically just artistic choice. You could color correct and adjust this image a million different ways, and none of them would necessarily be wrong. It's all a matter of preference. For example, I really like this blue tint, and I'm going to try to maintain that. But you could come to color, take the white balance and or color temperature, and you could increase it towards the yellows and get an entirely different look and feel to the image. I'm not going to do that, but again, there's nothing wrong with it. And as I said, these image files are available in the description to the video, so play around with it, see what you can come up with. Undoubtedly, many of you will be able to do better than what I'm about to do here. So the first thing I notice is I pretty much like the city. I think we can get all these colors to be a little more vibrant and pop out the highlight areas. But I do like that it's sort of darker. Maybe adjust the contrast a little bit. But really, where I think this photo is going to come alive is in the sky, because there's a lot of detail here in the clouds. It's very washed out right now, so it's hard to tell that there's detail, but it is absolutely there. And if you zoom in here, you can kind of see where you've got all this structure where there's dark bits and then lighter colored bits. If we can enhance that, I think we can really get um, something special with this image. So let us start by adjusting the cityscape first. And the logic behind that is the effects I'm going to do to the city are pretty minimal and they're not going to bother the sky all that much. Whereas I just know from experience the effects I'm about to do to the sky are going to be pretty aggressive and I don't want them to apply to the whole image. So I'm going to apply the effects to the city, which will be on the whole image. And then I'm going to go back with an additional method to apply effects just to the clouds. So let's start by looking at the city. So that's where we'll focus. We won't pay attention to the sky nearly as much right now. So under the light tab, I think we could bring the exposure up just a bit, contrast, and the shadows up. something like that. I don't think we're going to do anything under the color section. Now, to be clear, I am going to adjust colors, but I don't want to use the color options here. I'm going to come down to color mixer, where I have control over the hue, saturation, and luminance values. So immediately, I like these trees. I like the green that they're going to provide, but notice they're pretty yellow. I mean, it's green, but there's a lot of yellow in them, and you can definitely tell this because if I take the yellow slider, so it affects yellows in the image, and I move them to the right, look what happens to the trees. They become very green. So it's taking all of that yellow and mapping it into the green. Um, the problem is if I use the yellow to map into the green, other areas on this image with yellows are going to be affected. So if I, for example, move the slider to the right, notice this orangish yellow glow becomes a greenish tint, and I don't like that at all. Now, if I was really picky, I could come in and separate out just this area of the image and separate that area of the image and color adjust them independently. But I think we can get away with a simpler fix, and that's just by selecting the green channel and moving it more towards the aquas. Yeah, it's kind of subtle, but see, this is where I'm at, and then I can go to somewhere around there, the 50s. One thing that's worth noting is I rarely ever take a slider, any of the sliders, and just max or min them because it's almost always going to be too aggressive. So you really need to try to just do as little as possible to get the effect that you want. At least that's my philosophy behind it. Okay, now I don't think I'm going to do anything with any of the oranges and yellows, but I do want to look at these magentas. I think that we can push them more back towards the purple. See, if I take the magenta slider, I can make them more purple or I can make them more towards the reds. I'm going to bring them back more towards the purple. And it's not for any particular reason other than I like it. So as far as colors go, I think that's okay on the hue, but let's look at the saturation. If I take the red saturation and I bring it up, I think it's going to make the reds here on this bridge, this streak across the bridge, this highlight they have running around along the side, make it a little bit more noticeable. It's subtle, but it's there. I think I can also get with the magenta slider those guys to pop a little more. Again, I'm not maxing out. If you go all the way with the magenta slider, I think that's too much. Zoom in here. So that's maxed out. This is where it was. That's all the way. I think that's a little too aggressive. It is for my taste, but a little more saturation there wouldn't hurt. I can bring the green saturation up a little bit. And the oranges and yellows are going to really affect the windows and these blooms from the lights. And I do want them to really stand out. So I'm going to take both of those sliders and turn them up. And that's getting somewhere. Now the blues themselves, the whole image is covered in blue. So if I turn its saturation up, I mean, you're kind of hitting everything. If you take it all the way down, you're hitting everything except this area, which is interesting. But I think what I'm going to do is leave it where it's at for now. Because I like the blue. I like the overall tint that it has to it as is. Yeah, I think that's good. And the aquas I've noticed are really only focused on this area here. And so there's full saturation, there's without. I think it looks fine at neutral. One thing that you need to be comfortable with is not adjusting sliders. Not everything needs to be tweaked. Just because you can doesn't mean you have to. It's really a game of minimization, I think. So under the luminance tab, this is where we can take any particular color and brighten it up. So again, I want these windows and highlights of the oranges and yellows to pop. So I'm going to bring those up like so. Bring the greens up to make those trees stand out a little more. Or bring the red up. I think that should bridge a little more noticeable. And we'll bring the magentas up on these guys. Yeah, that kind of looks cool. Okay, so that's not bad for the city. The only other thing I want to do is I go to the effects panel here. I want to maybe drag the clarity up a bit. So this is clarity all the way up. Notice doing that brought out some detail in the clouds, but I hate what it did to the city. So I'm going to bring that down and just minimally use it on the city. Same with the texture. Texture maxed out on the city, I think looks like garbage. But if you take the texture and you just apply a little bit, I think it can really sweeten the image a bit. The dehaze is actually going to sort of either remove atmosphere or add it back in. So if I bring it down, that's going to be adding atmosphere back in. And it takes it a second on this one to adapt. Yeah, there we go. Right, so it kind of adds sort of atmospheric haze or removes it. I'm going to add it back to the city a little bit. I like this sort of moisture glow in the air. And so I really like where that's at. What I need to look at now is the sky. So to adjust the sky, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to select a linear gradient and I will click and drag right about there. So the idea is that everything in red above this line is going to be affected completely by the effects I add. Everything below is going to be excluded from the effects, and everything in the middle is going to go from 100% down to 0% effect, sort of the blending area here. And it's important actually to make that blending area fairly large. If it's very abrupt, you can notice that you've done something in the image. What we really want is for this thing to sort of blend seamlessly across. So we've got our area picked out, and of course, you can see right here that this is going to cause problems on these buildings, but I'll show you how to deal with that after the fact. There's lots of ways you could separate out the sky. You could come in and create a mask that went all the way around and really just cut the sky out and have it on its own separate layer. I think we can do a quicker, easier adjustment and still get a good look. So I'm going to turn the overlay off, which just gets rid of the red to there. I'm going to come down just to the effects area. And by the way, this mask that you've created has its own set of tools that are different from the original tools that are still there that we were adjusting earlier. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to turn the clarity all the way up. I'm going to bring the dehaze up quite a bit and look at that sky. That's pretty epic. All of that structure that was kind of hidden, right? If we come back, it's not really there. It's just sort of grayed out and very boring. Now it's a lot more dynamic and interesting, in my opinion. Now, one thing that happens when you do this is applying the clarity and dehaze. It really aggressively brings out the grain. But I'm going to bring the texture down just on the clouds and notice that it smooths that grain out. Sort of blends it together, but I still have a lot of detail and structure in the sky like I wanted. So I'm going to click back here on the edit section. This goes back to see all of our original effects that we applied are still there. And there we go. So what I need to do though is fix these buildings. And in order to do this, my preferred way is going to be to not do it in Camera Raw. What I'm going to do is just apply these changes to the image. I'm going to hit OK. And it takes a second because the Camera Raw view we just had was basically a preview, whereas now it's applying those effects to the actual image itself. Okay, so there it is. It's done. Something that I should have done beforehand. Let's do edit, undo Camera Raw. And then I'm going to click this layer, copy it, and paste it. And if I go to filter, this section right here, where it says, see, it says camera raw filter here, camera raw filter here. This first option under filter will apply the last effect that you just did. So all of the adjustments I made are there. Notice when I did undo in order to duplicate the layer, I can't reapply the camera raw filter by redoing. But if I come to filter and hit camera raw filter, it now applies everything I had back to this layer. Right, so the bottom layer now has the camera raw effect. Top layer does not. So if I turn the top layer off, here's what we've done so far. So the top layer is going to serve as a original before and after. That's what we're going to be doing here. But let's carry on for the moment. So I want to work on these buildings. So I'm going to zoom into this guy. And in order to do this, I'm going to use the tool over here that is the dodge tool. If you click on this icon and hold it down, you actually have three options: dodge, burn, and sponge. Sponge is going to remove color, so it's sort of like a desaturator. Burn will darken, dodge will lighten. So I'm going to click on dodge, and I'm going to make the brush a little bit bigger, maybe about 400. And I'm going to get in a little closer to this building. Now you can affect this in different ways. Notice I can affect the shadows, the midtones, or the highlights. I want to affect the shadows. And this exposure means every time I click, it has some maximum amount of the effect it can apply, but it's only going to do 20% of that. And this allows me to sort of incrementally make changes. I don't know how much of the effect I actually want to apply, so I want to add it on slowly. So I only want 20%. And you could play around with that. You may want it to apply faster or slower than what I'm doing. But what I'm going to do is just sort of click and drag and see how things are starting to brighten up. So let me make this tool a little bit smaller and sort of narrow in my focus a bit. Okay, so that's way better. It's still a little dark, but it's definitely not blacked out like it was a minute ago. And now we need to work on these guys in the same way. I'm going to make my tool back to 500 in size, and I'm just going to start clicking and dragging and just trying to brighten these guys up a bit. Clicking, dragging, and doing individual clicks as well. Okay, that's not bad. I'm going to fit on screen. I think that looks great as far as the buildings go. Now, while we're here, I think it's worth mentioning why do I like panoramas so much? As we saw earlier when I was doing the actual photo merge, each individual photo was only about this big, and I was using a 50 millimeter prime on a full frame camera. So, in order to capture all of this in a single shot on my camera, I would have to use a very wide angle lens. I don't know exactly what it would be, but maybe a 15 millimeter or less. When you get into that sort of focal length range on your lenses, you're going to introduce all sorts of geometric distortions and fisheye type of effects, which could be useful in certain applications, but may or may not be what you want. And I did not want them. I wanted this to look as normal as possible. So it's sort of recreating the view you would have if you just stared out onto London from my location. And the only way to get that effect and have this particularly wide field of view is with a panorama. So it's a very unique image that a single shot from an individual camera is almost not going to recreate. In addition to that, if we come up to image size and take a look, notice that we're over 19,000 pixels wide and over 7,000 pixels tall. And this is at 300 pixels per inch, meaning that if I was to print this, every inch I could put 300 individual pixels. Why that matters? Well, the near sight of a person with 20/20 vision is about 10 inches, meaning that once you get inside of that range, as you move towards your eyes, it becomes harder and harder or impossible for your eyes to actually focus on an image. So about 10 centimeters is about as close as you can get. Now, as you get closer to a printed image, you can start to make out individual pixels if it's very low resolution, and you lose that continuous color effect. Whereas at 300 pixels per inch, you should be able to get to that near point and not be able to distinguish individual pixels. Most humans will just see it as a continuum of color. So that means I can print this thing and people can hold it as close to their face and get as close as they want to examine it, and they'll still be able to see all of the detail that's there. In addition, if I switch this from pixels to inches, notice we're over 5 feet wide and over 2 feet tall. This is a massive photograph that we're dealing with here. That's already unique because of the panorama, but we can also print this to a huge size. I mean, we're talking about a wall hanger of an image here, and people can get as close as they want to and still see all the detail if we get it printed at this pixels per inch depth. That's why I like panoramas. It's just such a unique look that you can't get in any other way. Okay, so there's one other thing I want to do now, and I do this to most of my images. If I click on this guy, I'm going to go back to filter, camera raw. Now this is a new camera raw that we're adding to it, right? So it doesn't give me the original image. It gives me the one with the adjustments we've already made. I'm going to go to the effects tab and go to vignette. Now you can absolutely overdo vignettes. If I click on this and bring it all the way down, I personally think that looks poor. But if we bring it to about, I would say somewhere around here, I think it looks pretty good. So I'm going to hit OK and apply that vignette. All right, I think the image is pretty much done as far as what I'm going to do to it. Now let's take a look at the before, and now let's take a look at the after. I think the little bit of effort we put in to adjust the colors makes a world of difference. And I think most people will be hard to argue that this image, which is not a bad image necessarily, but it's very flat. There's no detail in the clouds. Even in the city, it's kind of boring. And with just a little bit of effort, I mean, we didn't spend that much time with the colors. We can turn it into something pretty decent, I think. So I'm quite proud of this image, and it didn't really take all that much effort. I mean, besides going to London and actually taking the photographs themselves, but putting that aside, once I have the images, it didn't take a lot of work. Now, you can get into a pickle with panoramas, especially if you have a lot of objects that are moving. So maybe they show up in different sub images, like a person walking by. I've had that happen before. So just getting a panorama to work can actually be quite challenging at times. This one came out quite nicely. I'm happy with it. And this is going to be what I consider the final composition. And so last thing I want to show you is how would I actually save this and archive it for later. So I'm done editing the image, so I don't need this extra layer, and I don't need to know any of the information that we've done to it. So I'm just going to flatten the image out, and then I'm going to come to File, and we will go to Save As. I will find the appropriate folder, and I'm going to save this as a TIFF file. And maybe we'll call this 001 London I. Save, no image compression. And that's about as good as you're going to get. Now let's go look at that file actually. Notice the file that we saved out is quite large, 851 megabytes. So it's not insignificant in size. That's something to be aware of, but it is complete. It's got all of the data that you want. And from this guy, I would then make other copies. Like, for example, this TIFF file is what is loaded here. I'll go to image size, and let's say I wanted a version to post on social media, or you wanted to email it to a friend or somebody. Well, maybe you only want to send something that's 4,000 pixels wide. So I'll select that and look at the how much smaller the four. I mean, that's 4,000 pixels wide. That's wider than Ultra HD on your screen, pixel wise. And look how much smaller it was in the actual composition itself. But we'll just fit the screen. It still looks like all the details there. But now I would do something like save as a copy and save this as a JPEG file. Hit save and maybe just do a quality 10, aggressive, 5 scans, and hit OK. And let's navigate to that file. Right, so here it is now. It's 1.38 megabytes. If I open it, there's the image, and it looks pretty good here on my computer screen. Now, this is not the one I would send to the printers. I would send the TIFF file to the printers, but 1.38 megabytes, you could send that through an email, no problem. You can send it through a text message, no problem. So, anyways, that's my process for getting images, panoramas. I hope you all enjoyed this. I hope you actually maybe learned something that you could use on your own images. If you've seen anything that I've done that you weren't certain about or you had questions you would like to ask me, just let me know. And if you'd like to see any more of this, let me know too, because I have lots and lots and lots of panorama images that I haven't even looked at yet. But I've got plenty we could go through, and I would love to do it if anybody wants to see it. So just let me know. Anyways, I hope you have a good day, and I'll maybe see you later.